And we're streaming away. We're streaming today. I hope you're doing well. If you're tuning in from the West Coast, I hope it's not hotter than hell. And we're streaming today. We're streaming today. I hope that you're fine, that your day is sublime, 'cause we're streaming How you guys doing today? Oh man, what a day this was for me. Just like an emotional roller coaster, and I'm feeling still on that emotional roller coaster today. I made a new song today, played my guitar a lot today, and also took a look at the news and have some news prepared. Lots and lots of fallout from the heat wave, right? That I was just delightfully singing about. And and of course, mixed in all of that news, people in jail for a gram of weed, watching as Bill Cosby goes free. Hey, New Perspective, how you doing? Don't know if I've seen you in the chat before, so there's a New Perspective. Good to see you. The Bill Cosby story to me is, oh yeah, too hot. Are you on the West Coast, bud? Oh man, I can't even believe what's happening, and we're going to go into it as we go down here, but I'm going to talk about the Bill Cosby story first, because it's just another case of like a wealthy man, right, just using his wealth in order to free himself from the consequences of his actions. That there's this narrative going on that, oh, it's a legal technicality with like a legal snafu, and people are actually buying that narrative. Far more likely and far more realistic is that Bill Cosby bribed people to go free, right? Very, very simple, very straightforward. Like, I'll give you money, you let me go free. It's classic. We've seen it before. Hey, Lonnie, how you doing? And people, of course, are pointing out the hypocrisy of it, the timing of it with Britney Spears being rejected, that her father is still... even though she's like a 40-year-old woman, her father is still in control of her destiny and her fate. She can't do anything without her daddy say so. But Bill Cosby, who raped over 60 women, oh yeah, oh, a technicality, yeah, oh, he gets to go, I guess. What? Excuse me? And of course now people are pointing out, yeah, like there's people in jail for like nothing. Right? There's people in jail for like hysterically small things that it's unbelievable that this is happening. Too bad Jello Pops didn't Jeffrey Epstein himself in jail. Yeah, I mean, it's first of all, how you doing, DM? I think that you got to remember, right, that Jeffrey Epstein had gone to jail one time before and had actually done 2 years in prison, which is like the softest possible thing for the crime that he was committing. And that was his second offense, and it looked like he was going to get the book thrown at him. So they had to suicide him, because he was definitely going to start outing people and start naming names. Whereas Bill Cosby, like, near as anyone can tell, he wasn't connected to any kind of wider perspective. So Britney Spears, if you're not familiar with the Britney Spears saga, and it is a saga, she is in what is called a conservatorship, where her parents are in control of her estate, essentially. That she doesn't actually have control of the money that she made as an artist. That it's actually her family that has control of it. This is a common thing to happen to celebrities, and can have very negative consequences, right? So when she had her freak out, remember how she shaved her head, right? And had that whole freak out thing? Well, her family used that as an excuse to say that she's not mentally stable, because they're driving her insane, obviously, right? Like, her life is insane, and they're driving her insane, and so she lashes out. And they used this as for a legal reason to gain control of her estate in a conservatorship. Oh yeah, I mean, I do. The second you realize that they're psychotic, right? The second you realize that our rulers are sociopaths, that money worship has driven us insane, right? That our ideology is completely focused around money worship, and we worship money. And if you pay attention to this channel for any length of time, you're going to hear me talk about this over and over again, right? Like, we have replaced any loyalty to any other idea. We've replaced the concept of God. We've replaced loyalty even to one another. Even the raising up of humanity or the nation state of the USA or any of this. We've replaced it with all of it with money. And it turns out that if you do that, it turns your nation into a nation of psychopaths. That nothing else matters, right? And that's the Bill Cosby story, in my view. That and the Britney Spears story, right? That ultimately her father is the one who has the money, and so he is good, and therefore he gets to maintain this sort of slave relationship that exists between him and his daughter. And the same story with Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby has money, and so he's able to just leverage that money to go free. It's idiotic to think that Bill Cosby didn't bribe a bunch of people. Like, are you kidding me? Of course he did. Like, that's very clear. And yet, Chinese Communist Party just celebrated their 100 years. Lots of beautiful moments came out of that. I'm sure that we'll encounter some. Hey, Ninetails, how you doing? Haven't seen you in a bit. Yeah, I heard it's because she said we need a mass strike. Yeah, she became communist or something. She has been espousing a lot of kind of communist stuff. So there's a bit of that going on too. Let's not fool ourselves. American history is littered with that kind of stuff, where people will use, they're part of the Communist Party, right? So we need to. That means that they're insane. Communism. But the big story, in my view, is the climate stuff. I have a bunch of links. First of all, Exxon lobbyists caught on video talks about undermining Biden's push. Hey, Mach, how you doing, bud? It was just a crumbe of coke. I don't know if I understand that statement, but I love it. And the unfortunately new perspective, it looks like the propaganda is being effective. That the anti-Chinese propaganda, and very quickly, I just read an article about that recently, how something like 70% of Westerners, so that's Canadians and Americans, have a negative perspective of China. So the propaganda that's being pumped into the mainstream media is being effective. It's working, which is a deep shame, because we have a lot of positive things to learn from China. There's been a lot of positive things that have happened in China. You can critique China, like it's accurate to say that China, in this conversation about climate change, like China is the number one polluter right now. China coal is like the number one polluter. So there's hurdles to overcome there. But if we genuinely cared about that, we would stop trading with them the way that we do, right? Or we would at least demand things be different. So, well, and racism definitely plays a big part in it. For sure it does. Just xenophobia, they're different than us, right? So, Exxon lobbyist caught on video talks about undermining Biden's climate push. This is actually a very large story. Like, these people should go to jail, right? These people should go to jail. I have an article here. Yeah, the climate crisis is a crime that should be prosecuted. It's absolutely the truth, right? The crime has been going on for decades. We see its effects in the horrific heat and wildfires. For God's sakes, the town of Lytton, which is where the heat wave, the heat record was broken in British Columbia. Well, of course, you're gonna have catastrophic fires, right, all through the region. So this town is actually burning down because of the fires have swept in, right? Lytton's Main Street before and after the fire, right? Like, the idea that we're going to adapt to this, the idea that we'll just change how we're living, or we'll somehow continue doing what we're doing, but like we'll just adapt to it. I think you have to be a fucking idiot to be talking like that. Like, the fires that are going to come through, the heat that's going to come down, you don't adapt to this. You just die. It's very straightforward, right? And like, this is the footage that's coming out. Hey Ruth, how you doing? Glad to see you. Just talking about the forest fires here in Lytton, around Lytton, which have burned down Lytton. Yeah, our poor little town of Lytton is gone, right? And so now this is getting people, hey, it's a crime, right? It's a crime. And the crime in question is the fossil fuels, 40 years of lying about climate change. Arguably the most consequential corporate deception in history. I don't know if it's arguable, like, it's going to destroy us. The industry's lies have had an effect of blunting public awareness and governmental action against what scientists say is now a full-fledged climate emergency. As a candidate, Joe Biden said he would support efforts to prosecute the oil giants. Yeah, that's bullshit. That's simply not going to happen, right? Like, internal records show that by the late 1970s, Exxon's own scientists were briefing its top executives. Need to bookmark this one. Potentially catastrophic. And further investigations found Chevron, Shell, BP, other oil giants likewise knew their products threatened, and they just chose to lie about it. Beginning in the 1990s, they spent millions of dollars on public relations campaigns to confuse the press, the public, and policymakers. And so we wasted precious decades arguing about whether or not it was real. Exxon could have ended the pretend debate over climate change as early as the 1980s, when scientists like NASA's Jim Hansen first raised public awareness in climate change. Yeah, think of what could have happened if we had started then, right? And so it's, yeah. We should prosecute these guys. They should go to jail. Everybody, like all of them, without a doubt. We should have trials on the scale of the Hague, right? Like, these guys should, and they should have everything stripped from them. They should have their wealth stripped. We should use that wealth in order to combat climate change. We should prosecute them in major ways. It should be a serious, like, this is as bad as a war crime. For God's sakes, like, I just closed the link, but like, it's burning down towns. It's burning down cities. Like, how could this not be considered like a major crime against humanity, if not a major crime against the nation itself? How is it that military personnel are not standing up and saying this is like a national security crisis? How is it that our generals, how is it that our lieutenants, admirals, like all of these guys, how is it that none of them are standing up and saying, this is a national security issue. It has to be addressed, and we have to take it seriously. Instead of that, we're still letting these ExxonMobil guys actually even communicate with us. This is the thing that fucks my head, right? Like, we are allowing the criminals to have access to our leaders still, and we're still tolerating that as a people. we're still looking at the fact that ExxonMobil is sending lobbyists, and we're not immediately abandoning the politician that's even talking to these guys, right? Like, our politicians should be saying and doing one thing. These people are criminals who need to go to jail forever, have all of their assets stripped. And I'm not talking about just like one CEO or one executive. I'm talking about the entire institution needs to go to jail. These lobbyists need to go to jail. The copy boy who works in the basement needs to go speak to Congress and needs to do jail time. Like, this is where I'm at. This whole institution needs to be declared completely fraudulent, nationalized completely. All of those people need to go to jail, and then we need to actually work to resolve this problem. And if somebody stands up and goes, I don't know if this is serious, they need to fucking go away. Like, shut the fuck up about this. It's unbelievable to me that there are still people in the conversation who are pretending that this is like, even the people who are saying like, sure, climate change exists, but we'll adapt to it. Oh, sure, climate change exists, but it's not a big deal. It is a big fucking deal, and these people need to be like ostracized from the society. This is why you need to give me as much money as you possibly can, because people like me need to be more prominent in the discourse, and the psychopaths who are attempting to destroy us need to go the fuck away. Like, share, subscribe. Like, this needs to end. And it is going to end. It's going to end one of two ways. And the one way is more likely than the other. That one way is the wholesale destruction of humanity. That the sun will scour us from the face of the planet. That's the most likely scenario now because of these criminals, right? And the other way is that we actually do solve the problem, but we're not going to solve the problem with these guys being involved in it, right? Because they're psychopaths. They're not interested in resolving the problem. They're interested in making as much money as they can from our misery. And I genuinely believe that some of these guys, when they heard that this was going to be like a world-destroying thing, that they thought, oh good, this is how I'll do it. Right? I think that these people are psychopaths. I think that they're evil on the same level as like Skeletor or Sauron, right? Or Voldemort, Darth Vader. I think that they're absolutely evil and they need to be defeated. And we need to communicate about them that way. That we are Harry Potter and they are fucking Voldemort. And this idea that we're going to negotiate with these guys is over. You don't fucking negotiate with Voldemort. You fucking kill Voldemort. That's how the story goes. Hey, Name Last, how you doing, man? Yeah, geoengineering at this point, and it's a fucking crazy world, dude. It's a crazy world. Can we pull up on it? I got no fucking idea. I got no idea. It's gonna require like a mass rebellion at this point. It's gonna require like mass disobedience and rebellion at this point, because these politicians are cowards, right? They don't give a fuck. Like, they don't care. Like, this town in Lytton burned down, and like Justin Trudeau is gonna say, "Oh, my heart goes out to the people of Lytton." He doesn't give a fuck. He doesn't care at all. Like, carbon sequestration. How's that for a word? Sequestration. Like, carbon sequestration. How dare you write such a difficult word in the chat, Name Last? How dare you make me say out loud in front of everyone such an incredibly difficult word? I rather like that. Hey, Vince. Yeah, time to abolish. It's past time. It's past time. Because capitalism is going to abolish itself, and it's gonna take us all with it, right? Like, carbon sequestration tech at a scale is nowhere near any level happening in the next 50 years. Yeah. Well, and it's getting to be stupid. Like, I'm listening to people. Like, I saw a thing where somebody was like, "Oh, we could make like underground cities and bunkers and shit." Like, this is how stupid we are. That the concept of just stopping, just stop, just don't do it anymore, cease doing these things, is not even on the table. That we can imagine carving out a city underneath the ground. Our mind can be like, yeah, we can carve a city underneath the ground and live as underground beings. And we can get there before we can get to just fucking stop. Just fucking stop. Go to Times Square, shut it all down. All that, like, there's another, yeah, New York City's mayor just told us to turn off our air conditioners. The brands of Times Square are still blazing and consuming. These are screenshots of live webcams taken just now. Oh, we'll go to Mars and that'll help everything. And we'll dig an underground bunker and that'll help everything. Can't shut this shit off. No, can't do that. That's, whoa, what are you talking about? Hold on a second. Time out. That doesn't make any sense. Right? Like, at this point, like, we have to start communicating about this as if it's a mental illness, right? Like, how is this not a mental illness? Just stop. Just stop. Can't do it. I mean, yeah, you're onto something there. New perspective, like the Chinese Communist Party, and the populace itself agrees that they approve largely of how their government operates in big ways, right? Harvard just did it was like a 20-year study that they did, studying and asking the people of China how everything. Yeah, Z is being fired from the shadowy cabal for not killing everyone with COVID. Yeah, it was supposed to kill everybody. That's right. And meanwhile, here in the West, like we don't trust these guys. Like the only reason we pay attention to these guys is because we have to. Yeah, did you see the new Trudeau? Yes, I did, Vince. He's clearly planning an election. Yeah, in October after the MPs get their pension. Yeah. Well, and that might be a bit late for him, honestly. Like, I think that right now the Trudeau government is riding a wave of positive COVID energy, right? Like his where he's standing in the polls right now is actually quite soft. And I think when an election comes along, you're going to see how it softens up pretty quickly. Because people aren't happy. Like, are you happy? I'm not happy with how this is going. Like, and I don't believe that the liberals are interested in preventing any of this. I know, buddy. I know. Oh, when Milo starts barking, you know what that means. That means we get to see the pug. That means he flies through the air. He's the fanciest little guy I know. Yes, I know, buddy. Swim to victory. There you go, buddy. I do think that the NDP have started the attack. Like, the attack ads that I've seen and the media that I'm seeing come out of the NDP is good. So far, so good. But we'll see how seriously the NDP, like NDP riding a dumpster down a hill, yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. And, like, you got to remember that the NDP, like, they're living in a society that still tolerates the conservatives and the liberals. So already you know that the society is largely idiotic, right? Like, literally anyone is voting conservative and literally anyone is voting liberal. That means that the society is, like, illiterate, ignorant, stupid. Like, and I say this with all the love in my heart here on Canada Day, right? But, like, for real. Like, for real. If you're checking liberal, if you're checking conservative, there is something wrong with you. And there is something wrong with us as Westerners. There's something drastically wrong with us. And it's becoming more and more obvious that there's something very, very wrong with Western civilization and Western culture. That, like, down to the roots. Like, it's one thing to talk about, like, the wealthy and how the wealthy are abandoning us, right? But we abandon each other. Like, there's no culture of like love your neighbor as yourself. Like, all that is gone. Like, all of this like Christian teaching of like give a shit about one another, completely gone, right? When I take a look at what has happened to the millennial generation, it's extremely obvious that this is a culture of predators that prey on each other, and if you don't succeed at exploiting someone else, then you're the loser and you get to be discarded, right? Go vote conservative. We literally do not give a shit about one another in this culture. Like, we don't give a shit about one another in this culture. And that's the big hurdle, right? That's the big hurdle to overcome. It's this ideology of individualism that fails. The second, and it fails in obvious ways, because if you're in a culture, if you're in a community, well, there are times where you do need to move as a collective body, right? And if you're all standing around saying, oh no, we're individuals and that'll solve it, well, no. Like, fucking no. Can you imagine if Chinese Communist Party governed Canada? How good will life be? I lost interest in... Canadian politics is interesting. Like, Canadian politics is interesting. That's the thing, right? It's just... It's not interesting in the way that the mainstream media reports on it, right? It's interesting once you recognize who, like, the humanity of the players. That, like, Justin Trudeau is just, like, the son of a former prime minister, right? Like, he's essentially a walking haircut. He has no ideas, he has no thoughts. He's just a pretty boy, right? Who literally will, like, read a cue card. That's it. That's it. And he's only in there because he fits sort of the narrative that Canadians like to see emulated into the world, right? He's a pretty man. He's a beautiful man. He's got a decent amount of charisma, right? But, like, he doesn't give a fuck about us at all. And so I'm steadily getting to, yeah, Canada is a warning. More and more of the world will soon be too hot for humans, right? And, like, the 2019 European heat wave killed 2,500 people, right? Was 5 times more likely than it would have been without global warming. Like we are just at this absolutely crisis moment, and it genuinely looks like our leadership is going to do nothing about it. Like, it genuinely looks that way. That we're going to go into an election and people and the Liberals are going to say what they're going to say, but we're definitely like we shouldn't expect anything from them because they've done nothing for us so far, right? Like, why would we continue believing this? Yeah. New York City sending a text to residents to turn down the AC while leaving Times Square's lit up is a great example of how the individual responsibility to stop climate change has been pushed to redirect our focus away from the corporations and failed government policy, causing the most harm. That's absolutely the case. Anybody that says, like, no, it's individual responsibility, like, literally Times Square is lit up. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? I don't understand people whose politics isn't informed by the fact that we're out of time. Climate disaster is here. Fascism is at the door. Capitalism is killing us. There isn't time for incrementalism. Like, we need climate protests, and at this point it's back to occupation, right? We need to be occupying the streets. We need to be occupying the highways. We need to be taking the 401 should be clogged. It should be clogged. We should go buy a bunch of cheap beater vehicles and just clog up the 401. Just, like, drive them up there, walk away. And meanwhile, Aaron O'Toole, right, his party even denies the existence of climate change, right? Aaron O'Toole doesn't deny the existence of climate change, but his party sure fucking does. His party sure fucking does. And 20% of Canada votes conservative, is planning on voting conservative. Like, that's like having a cyst on your brain. That's like having a tumor on your brain and just being like, yeah, this is fine. Yeah, we've waited too long, and now it's only hardline taxes and regulations with degrowth that can even. Yeah, we just need to stop. We just straight up need to stop. Like, and there's a lot of things we can do. Like, there is a lot of things we can do. Like, the corporate mantra is, no, we just need to grow more, right? We just need to make new technology or do more stuff. And it's literally the opposite. It's literally the opposite. It's go to Times Square and shut it down. Like, go to Dundas Square and shut it down. Like, we do not need this stuff to be here. Like, why in the hell are there, like, lights on 100% of the time all over the place? Like, what in the hell are we talking about here, right? Like, and like, what the hell are you talking about that, like, the rich are just, like, literally, like, wealthy people are flying, like, from Chicago to New York, and then to New York to Buffalo, and then Buffalo to Florida, and then Florida, and they're doing that in a day. And it's like, what are we, stupid? The answer is obviously yes, but, like, we cannot be this stupid to just let one person, like, fly around the country like this, spewing toxic chemicals into the atmosphere. Like, it's getting to be, like, ridiculous. So, moving away from climate change, right? Canada's coming crisis with Indigenous peoples. The alienation didn't come from nowhere, and it won't be going away anytime soon. And the good news, of course, about this particular story, right? Aaron O'Toole's dead end, his rant against Cancel Canada Day, appeals to very few. Meanwhile, other conservatives opt to mourn and reflect. This is actually something that is kind of a good news. That, like, Aaron O'Toole is not nailing it with his own base, right? His own base is looking at this guy and being like, he just seems like another careerist type. He doesn't actually seem to have, like, opinions or thoughts, right? Like, he's just doing what he thinks he needs to do to get votes. And he doesn't actually... And this is something that actually I think Canadians see with Jagmeet Singh. That they see that Jagmeet Singh obviously is a man of conviction, right? How do we know Jagmeet Singh... Or I've been corrected about this. Jagmeet Singh. How do we know that Jagmeet Singh is a man of conviction? Because he's wearing a turban, right? He's wearing a turban in a country where everybody has told him to take the turban off, right? Like, I can show you videos and videos and videos of people walking up to Jagmeet Singh and saying, oh, you got to get rid of the turban, bud. You better get rid of that turban, right? Here he is. He's not getting rid of the turban, right? And that tells you, and Canadians are responding to this by saying, and this is the best you're ever going to get out of white people. They're saying, I don't understand why he needs to wear the turban. I don't really get it, but he believes he needs to wear the turban. It doesn't affect me, and I respect that his conviction and determination. And, like, you take a look at Jagmeet Singh and compare him to Aaron O'Toole, and you're like, yeah, which of these two guys do I believe actually has more conviction? Which of these two guys do I actually believes in what he's saying, right? And so that's going to be a big inroad for Jagmeet, I think. That people will look at him and think, you know, I don't necessarily agree with what he says, but I respect his conviction and who he is as a person, which in politics matters a lot. You got to remember, like, George W. Bush, right? George W. Bush wins his election against Al Gore because people felt they could have a beer with him, right? He was just a good old boy, and everybody was just like, oh yeah, he's just a good old boy, I could go have a beer with him, right? So these things matter, man. These things matter. When you consider that, like, huge sections of the populace are looking at Justin Trudeau as, like, an out-of-touch elite rich kid, and they're looking at Aaron O'Toole as, like, just a careerist corporatist, right? Even his own supporters think this of him. Well, They're going to start looking at a guy like Jagmeet Singh and be like, oh, here's a guy who's taking the hard road, right? Who's taking the hard road. And in terms of favorability, Jagmeet Singh is ahead of everybody else, right? In terms of favorability, Jagmeet Singh is number one. If it was just a straight up, which one of these guys do you want to be the prime minister contest, right? Based on favorability, it'd be Jagmeet. And it wouldn't be that close, right? It wouldn't be that close. So there's inroads, there's hope, but it is like herding cats. It is like we're hoping like the stars align in many ways. We're hoping that we're hoping that the NDP can actually run a successful campaign, which already is like a wish and a dream. Can the NDP actually run a successful campaign? We'll see. And then it requires Canadians to actually abandon these two other parties, which, are we ready? Are we ready for that? Weaponized DMCA. This is absolutely wild. An Oakland police officer played popular music on his phone, in this case Taylor Swift's Blank Space, after he noticed a civilian recording him, all in order to prevent the video from being recorded from being published online. Right? Like, and they admit to doing this. That's like, the American police forces do not work for the public. Like, that's very, very clear. Like, these guys are doing everything they can to try and get in the way of actually spreading around information, actually spreading around what the police are doing. Like, and I mean, and that's just childish, because you just take the audio out, right? You just take the audio out. That's it. Like, when a cop is doing something, you can see what he's doing, right? You don't need to hear him. Like, anyway. Xi Jinping has made it very clear the days of bullying China are gone for good. Yeah, in his speech that he gave yesterday, or this morning, he outright said, like, and I believe we're probably going to end up seeing the direct quote, but it was along the lines of anyone who tries to bully China is going to be confronted with a wall of steel built by 1.4 billion people. Like, yeah. He's very aware that the Americans, opening the map as I do, opening the map. He's very, very aware that the Americans are trying to mess with China. He's very, very aware of it. Like, for goodness sakes, like, the Americans are putting battleships in the through the South China Sea. They're sending delegations to Taiwan. Until I see anyone, Canadian politicians really care Canadians, I lost interest in Canadian politics. Yeah, and I mean, it is just about engagement. It is about engagement. Like, I mean, we could oust these guys, right? We just have to actually engage in the process. But Canadians don't, and it's not really their fault that they don't, because they're all so exhausted. Everybody's so exhausted. Everyone's working 2 jobs, right? Trying to raise kids, trying to do all this kind of stuff, and so they can't possibly pay attention. How do they pay attention to politics? Right? And that's why Canadian politics has gotten boring. That's why American politics has gotten boring, because nobody can actually engage in the system. Are you in China, New Perspective? Is that where you're from? It's absolutely upsetting to see Western social media censor and silence actual voices from a region that they themselves allege a genocide is happening. The real Xinjiang is where we use many voices from actual Uyghurs in our debunking vids. Yeah, like, what do you think? Like, so there's people actually broadcasting from the Xinjiang region, and Bay Area, which Bay Area 415 does really, really good work. Really, really good YouTuber, really worth paying attention to. And Well, if you're in Canada, New Perspective, then you should pay attention to Canadian politics. Oh yeah, how long have you been here? Anyway, yeah, Bay Area 415, definitely worth paying attention to, and really pointing out, like, if there's actually something going on, don't you want the people themselves from the region actually talking about it? But of course, it completely destroys the narrative, right? So they got to get rid of it. Did you know that Saskatoon police officers offer free tours to see the Northern Lights? Google Starlight Tours to know more. Oh yeah, this is a heartbreaking story. People used to, in Saskatchewan especially, there are stories where the police would take First Nations people. So there would be like, you know, a drunk First Nations guy walking down the street or whatever, and they'd pick him up and they'd drive him outside of town, several miles out of town, and then just drop him off, right? And then of course First Nations people would freeze to death because of this, right? Because they weren't dressed appropriately for the weather because they thought that they were just going to be able to walk home. They didn't think the police were going to drop them off outside of town. So, no systemic racism in Canada, though, you guys. No systemic racism. Been here a decade. Very nice. How you liking? How you liking it? How you liking it? And what brought you here from China? Probably work, right? Probably work. The secretive formula used by bosses to punish workers for being sick. Very nice. Let's take a look at this. The Bradford factor, a secretive formula used by bosses to determine the disruptiveness of worker absences. Like, this kind of shit is psychotic. Like, modern workers have always been subject to control of managers. So they're using, like, the Bradford factor. It's a simple calculation designed to measure how disruptive a worker's sickness absence is. The calculation runs B equals SXSXD, where B is the Bradford factor score, S is the number of discrete episodes of sickness absence over a given period, and D is the total number of days of sickness absence over the same period. Normally, the calculation will be accompanied by a trigger point, meaning that when an employee's Bradford factor score reaches a certain number, disciplinary proceedings are initiated. So they're literally turning it into a formula that we are a number, right? We're just a number. We don't need. This is what we mean to these guys, like brainwashed. No, brainwashed in young age. The Western media and their agents in China. Brainwashed. How do you mean New Perspective? Like, so the Western media. Oh, so you believed that you would come to Canada and have a better life, is what you're saying. And now you're here, and it's been a while, and you're thinking to yourself, we didn't have it so bad in China after all. That's sort of the narrative that you're laying out? On its first try, Canada's Zhurong rover hit a Mars milestone that took NASA decades. Now, to be fair, it's like, I'm sure that China's space program benefited from some of the work that NASA was doing, to be fair. But it is telling that, like, China's Zhurong rover landed safely on Mars on May 15th, making China only the third country to successfully land a rover on the red planet. Like, it's amazing how quickly China is growing and how quickly they are, like, growing so exponentially. What, like, New Perspective, what would you say is sort of the biggest thing that you were told to expect that ended up not being the truth? Like, what was different from the propaganda versus the actual lived experience? Yeah. Planetary scientist Roberto Orosi told Nature China is doing in a single go what NASA took decades to do. While astrophysicist John McDowell described China's decision to include a rover in its maiden Mars outing as a very gutsy move. Like, this is actually like a low key massive story. The idea that like China is in this Mars conversation in serious ways, and are beginning to overtake, right? That on the first go, they're basically taking like 20 years of research and just saying, we can do it in one go, right? Very impressive. Very impressive. I don't really have any way to get anybody to talk on the show, dude. Sorry about that. I am working on that. And I do think I may limit that to just Patreons. So consider donating to my Patreon. I'm glad that you're here. Oh yeah, dude, donate to my Patreon. It's in the description. I can see that based on the questions I've gotten from people in other countries while visiting. Oh, you mean like Ruth, like you've gone to other places and they ask you questions that are like kind of out of touch with your own lived experience? That I haven't even considered this. The idea that like there's this large-scale propaganda campaign in other nations, right? Like, and I think about that a lot, actually. Like, the amount, or sorry, I haven't thought about that a lot, but it's like the amount that we propagandize ourselves. It makes sense that we would attempt to propagandize other nations with the same kind of stuff, which is why Donald Trump was such a problem for the elites and why they worked so hard to get rid of him, because think about like is this Thailand that you're talking about? Yeah, like yeah, like Donald Trump broke apart all the propaganda, right? Like, he as a figure made all the propaganda look fake, because I mean it is. Yeah, that's definitely happening. They evilize, villainize Chinese ruling party. They evilize our way of life in China, for sure. Absolutely, that's the case. Like, absolutely, the amount of propaganda that has come into Western culture because of this Cold War that's brewing. When like everything I see about China is like, what a wild, like, I mean, it's a different place than us, for sure. It's a different place than us, for sure. But it's got its own history and its own society and its own way of doing things. And just because it doesn't align with Western values doesn't mean anything. Western values don't seem to be that good, right? Like, yeah, exactly. Yeah, they watch the news and have stereotypes like Kardashians, Dallas, even Cosby or Fresh Prince. Yeah, that's a good point, right? So we've created this like, yeah, and then they say we have independent media. What a joke. Yeah. But like, and I think one of the things that really woke everybody up was the Beijing Olympics. Like, people did not expect the size and scale and organization that that the Beijing Olympics really revealed of the Chinese. And I remember when that happened, it was magnificent. It was a magnificent. The Beijing Olympics were magnificent. And like, I remember the huge, like, those huge scale drummers, like large scale event, and the guy that was like flying through the air. It was all very crazy. Oh, I understand your perspective. We're all doing our best. We're all trying. I'm just glad you're here. Get a room. What? Get a room with the Beijing Olympics? Is that what you're saying, Name Last? What? I can admire. My background is in theater, so when I see something so brilliantly done, it's worth talking about. Learning communism through theory. Learning communism through Arjen Zedong. Well, I mean, yeah, dude, I mean, I can. Like, for God's sakes, what they're doing right now in Afghanistan, Iraq, the Yemen genocide, the Yemeni genocide, the Israeli genocide, the Palestinian genocide, I should say, the destruction of Libya, right? And not to mention the shit that they're doing all throughout the sanctions against Venezuela, the support of a coup in Colombia, which has resulted in like a mass civil war in that region. Oh, what's your struggle, named last? Because I have a fairly, I feel like I have a more balanced perspective, and one of the goals for me in this channel is to try and create a more balanced perspective of China. And one of those things, one of the ways that you balance your view of what's going on in China is to acknowledge the good things that they've done. And of course there's things to critique. Like, there's still, in the climate change conversation, right, there's still a lot of work for them to do with the amount of pollution that they're producing. But I see them actually moving on that and actually attempting to improve what they're doing, unlike the United States, which is just kind of plowing straight in. And like, I could talk about Hong Kong, for example. I think that how China is handling Hong Kong only makes sense in like a war kind of way, that like they don't necessarily want to have an independent Hong Kong right here with a military base, an American military base on it, right? So, but at the same time, the people of Hong Kong themselves are standing up and protesting. So when the people themselves are protesting, you do have to acknowledge the truth of that, right? That when people take to the streets and when people protest, they are the ones that are speaking the truth, and they are the ones who are correct in what they're doing, and they're airing their frustration and they're airing their anger. And there's lots to be angry about in Hong Kong. But what I don't like is how much we've demonized China. That China is being treated as an enemy, as somebody for us to be scared of. And when I look at China, that's not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing another nation that's coming up onto the world stage for us to cooperate with, collaborate with, to work with. Yeah, exactly. Chinese social media, see how Chinese young people live. And like, you can go to YouTube, and there are Americans and British people living in China who they do like a daily video vlog of them walking around China and like showing off things that exist in China and all this. And like, I feel like if I lived in China, and I know people who live in China, in fact, and their experience of it, like, it seems normal. Like, it seems like a normal life, and with normal people living normal things. And sure, there's like wild batty things that can happen, but you'll find that in every single nation you ever look at. And yeah. And so like, I'm concerned that because we are inundated with so much xenophobic propaganda and anti-Chinese propaganda, that's where we, especially as Westerners, are beginning our journey in China, and so we're naturally suspicious of China, and I don't think that's healthy. I don't think it's healthy to build a society that way. Like, forget about like our communications with China. Forget about like trade policy or building a relationship with this nation. I think it's a good way to start destroying relations within your own country, doing this kind of thing. Because if you train your populace to be suspicious of things that they're unfamiliar with, well, then you're going to see a rise in hate crime against people that don't look the way you do, which is exactly what's happened in Canada. So the problem with the lab leak, so Ruth, you're saying a lab or government are being blamed for it, and people are not involved. Like, Trump was our pseudo-president, but the majority of Americans think he's a crazy person. 50% of the populace does not. 50% of the populace is voting for Trump. And the lab leak, like, anytime I look into it, the people who actually have expertise in the field are saying, like, sure, it's possible, but the likelihood of it is extremely low, and it's far more likely that it was a natural event. Like we saw like Jon Stewart. Jon Stewart really popularized the lab leak theory by going on, and his critique essentially was, oh, the lab that was there was named the Wuhan COVID lab. And it's like, yeah, because they're studying COVID in the place that it's most likely to occur. Like, China dealt with SARS, right? China has been dealing with virus outbreaks that have not made it to the West, right? And so the question, okay, and I'm gonna just put a firm stop on like pursuing this conspiracy theory. I will gladly look at evidence, but like, I don't think that COVID came out of a lab. I don't think it's likely that it came out of a lab. I think it's far more likely that it was a natural event. And in my view, like, if you want my like straight view on this, I think that this conversation about lab leak is just like humans doing tribalism, trying to draw a line, point a finger, right? Instead of reflecting on how their own culture actually dealt with this issue. And then once again, as humans always do, elevating themselves beyond their station, right? That the natural world is far more impressive than humanity. That the natural world is far more capable of destroying us than we like to admit. And that the natural world that exists around us has far more to say about something like COVID than we do, right? That the idea that it was like, it bestows upon humanity a kind of superpoweredness, right? That we simply don't have. And I do agree with you, Garden Mice, that the gain of function research seems very dangerous, but also like I don't quite understand the necessity of it. It feels like it's like an idea that came out of the brain of like a Nazi scientist at some point, where they're like, we'll take a disease and then we'll have it in a lab and we'll manipulate it and change it, and that way we will be able to get ahead of it. Yeah, that's the reason we're doing this, is to get ahead of it. Right? But it's like pretty clearly like, it's very easy to believe that like bioweapons Fort is United States Army Futures Command installation. Yeah, United States Biological Weapons Program. Well, and these things, biological weapons, most nations stopped pursuing biological weapons in serious ways because it became obvious that you can't control them, right? Like, that's fundamentally the issue with bioweapons, that you can't control. If you release a biological, or virus or a disease into, let's say, India, right? Well, you've lost control of it from the beginning. You've lost control of it from the outset. And the idea that you're going to like release this in India and it's not going to find its way to the United States, right? Let's say the United States is the one that's using these biological weapons. Like, you don't have control of it. And so that's the reason why biological weapon programs get shut down, because they really realize, like, oh yeah, this is like, it's not like a nuclear bomb. Like, a nuclear bomb, like, it has catastrophic effects, certainly, but it doesn't have like the immediate impact of everybody in your culture getting sick and dying. So they stopped once it became very apparent that there's no way to control these things. And And I don't think that, and while I think that, like, yeah, there are obviously people who are researching viruses, like that's where vaccines come from. This is where this all happens. The trouble with the conversation of the lab leak theory is that it has a cousin, and it's that COVID was actually a biological weapon. That's where this conversation goes, and I super do not like this conversation because, again, if you guys follow the channel for any amount of time, you know that I'm a secularist, but I'm also a theologian, and the universe and the earth itself is far more impressive. And I really find that this conversation ends up kind of becoming a cesspool of human worship. That even as we are pointing fingers at each other and accusing each other, there's embedded in this conversation an elevation of humans beyond their status. That if we're going to get wiped out, it's going to be humans that wipe us out. It's not going to be the natural world. It's not going to be because we defied the will of the universe or the will of God, if you prefer. No, it's going to be because we're the greatest. And so our greatness is what wiped us out, right? And I super don't like this line of reasoning. And I wish that we would... and exactly as Marx says, diseases have been around for billions of years and evolved just as we humans do. And I genuinely think that the best thing for us to be doing in this conversation is for us to humble ourselves before the might and force of the universe, stop doing a whole bunch of shit that we're doing in the first place, and simply say that we need to get in balance with the universe, and we need to get in balance with the forces of nature. Because I've heard it pointed out, like it's going to get more likely that these sorts of viruses are going to happen because of climate change, right? That climate change is altering the natural paths of wildlife. And so suddenly you're starting to see wildlife that's never encountered, like these geese have never encountered these types of foxes before, right? And so you're having animals in ecosystems that have never encountered one another before. And that's how you spread viruses in big ways, right? That, like, think about smallpox throughout the United States, right? The Europeans started colonizing the United States and South America, and the place gets absolutely ravaged by smallpox because they'd never seen it before, right? It had never been here before. And so now you're telling me that there's a whole bunch of wildlife that's starting to encounter each other, and they've never seen each other before. Well, guess what's going to happen, right? They're going to spread a bunch of diseases around each other, and it just takes a jump from like an ape to a human, and suddenly we've ramped it up, right? Not to mention the fact that the viruses themselves can mutate. So it's and like, I understand why the lab leak theory exists. I understand. Okay, please tell me why I see on TV markets where wild animals are slaughtered for food in an open market. I mean, that's how humans have been doing that for longer than what we've been doing now, right? It's far more common in human history for us to slaughter animals in open markets than for us to jam them into these factory farms that we do. And we pretend like the factory farms are cleaner, but I don't think so. I think it's actually, like, at least equivalent. Like, you're jamming all these, like, chickens into, like, a single room. Like, is that good? Like, is that better? And again, like, I understand where the lab leak theory is coming from, and everybody wants to be safer, right? Everybody wants to think about the safety. I just worry that this conversation is explicitly being done to weaponize and politicize the virus. That instead of saying, oh man, there was a virus outbreak, like has happened previously in the not very distant past, right? Like Ebola was a virus outbreak. SARS was a virus outbreak, right? And the the idea that a virus outbreak happens and it actually comes to the United States finally. I mean, this is just a matter of time, but now I feel like this discourse, instead of saying viruses occur, we've seen them plenty of times throughout history, and instead of turning the focus on ourselves and saying, okay, why weren't we prepared for this? Why were we so taken aback? Why were we put on the back foot? Why was this such a crisis for Westerners to deal with? Why do we have an anti-mask movement? Why is there an anti-lockdown movement? Like, why is this happening in our culture? And instead of asking those questions of ourselves, we're going to turn around and be like, oh, these Chinese leaked the virus. It's all their fault, and we're going to point fingers at them, and we're not actually going to pay attention to our reaction, and we're not actually going to build better defenses and become more resilient. And another virus is going to show up, as they do, right? As they do, and as they will continue to do, and we're just going to get blindsided by it again. And this ties in with what I keep saying about the mass graves, the First Nations mass graves, right? Like, we have to acknowledge these things, acknowledge ourselves and our role and how we've reacted and how we've done, or else we're just going to keep acting this way. We're just going to keep destroying people. We're just going to keep taking over nations. We're just going to keep selling weapons to genocides and shit like this. We're just going to keep doing it if we don't actually acknowledge our failures and attempt to rectify them. And just like it's true of the residential school system, it's also true of this conversation with the lab leak. And I'm very suspicious. Like, I think most people, right? Most people have just like a curiosity about it, and I think that they're just like, it could have been a lab leak, but understand fully that there is 100% a fascist movement in Canada and the United States that wants to weaponize this narrative in order to go after Chinese people. Without a doubt, that exists. And especially as this conversation moves to like biological weapons and how like neo-fascists and fascists in our country definitely talk about this as bioweapons because they want to foment a war based on lines of ethnic cleansing. For sure that is happening. For sure that is happening. Believe it or not, Ruth, it's illegal in China to slaughter certain wild animals. Oh, interesting. Just very few people these days eat wild animals. Well, that's got to be a holdover, right? Like, I mean, and that's got to be like big Western propaganda as well. Like, I mean, as if like in the United States during the colonial period, people weren't shooting and eating wild animals. Like, it's such a I feel like that really preys on how people in the West are very disconnected from the food system. Like, I'm from Manitoba, right? People go hunting, they shoot animals and then eat them, right? And there's this sort of like looking down the nose at this of like, ooh, how disgusting. But it's like, how do you think you get your meat, dude? Like, what do you think that process looks like? Do you think that process is better? I personally never did, even I left China a decade ago. Is it maybe more normal in small villages? Keep in mind, thank you for your explanation. Many so-called Chinese from Taiwan and Hong Kong make lots of negative materials about China. Well, and it makes sense that the Taiwanese would. I can't imagine what it must be like to be like the ruling class of Taiwan, to know that like Taiwan used to control China, right? That this is where the leaders of China used to live. And they used to live and own and control China. And then the Communist Party of China took over and basically is like, yeah, Taiwan and China are of the same country, but you no longer rule us, right? So that's a very different perspective. So of course Taiwan has a kind of a negative perspective. And Hong Kong as well, because Hong Kong for 100 years was a British colony, right? It's kind of amazing that the transfer of Hong Kong happened so peacefully. Like, that the British were just like, yeah, we had this for 100 years and it's over, and so we're done. So, and now it's Chinese. It's kind of amazing it happened that way. Why waste time and money trying to find out whether the virus was created by man when we could put that to use to trying to find more efficient methods of fighting COVID? Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. Like, think about all the energy that we're going to put in to weaponizing this conversation, to pointing fingers, to building structures, and to push in order to get people into China to investigate these labs and all this kind of stuff, when we could very easily use that energy and finances to create more resilient internal systems. Resilient internal systems which existed, incidentally, and that administrations come in and dismantle. Like, the Trump administration dismantled some of these things, right? Like, yeah, they don't understand the mentality in Western countries and laughing at us. Yeah, it's, well, and it's especially odd, like, when you consider, like, China has 1 billion people, man. Like, 1.4 billion people. Like, it's... I don't understand why the Western mentality of, like, oh, they're strange foreigners. Like, there's way less of us than there are of them. If anybody's the strange foreigner, it's us. Like, and they have like a culture that's like 2,000 years old plus, right? They have dynasties, they have eras, right? We've been here for 150 years, like, and we're supposed to be the superior culture. Oh, okay, that's a fun position to take. Doesn't really stand up. We extend our deepest condolences to all Indigenous peoples who suffer the ongoing consequences of the residential school system, the removal of Indigenous children from their families, and other racist policies and actions by the Canadian state. July 1st is not a day for celebration. And this is coming out of the Conservative Party of Hamilton, right? The CPC Hamilton. So, like, this is something interesting that does exist within the Conservative Party here in Canada, which is that lots and lots of the people involved in the Conservative Party are Christian, right? And they're not like, I come from a Christian family. They're like, I have the Bible, I read the Bible, I go to church, right? I am a Christian. And there's been a great deal of denialism regarding the systemic racism and the importance of the residential school system and all of this. But the exhuming of these mass graves is like a shattering of this barrier that these Christians who have changed their tune before, right? Remember, it was the evangelical Christians who were the ones that were standing up saying that gay people are evil and of the devil and all of this, and that all went away, right? I mean, it's not gone, obviously. They're still fascists, but, like, they're not... oh, my mistake. That's the Communist Party? It doesn't... Thank you for the correction, Dan Boxes. I appreciate that. That's the Communist Party. My mistake. Thank you for the correction. But I am still observing this in the Conservative Party. I am still observing this in the Conservative Party. That while obviously you'll always have those far-right fascist elements, which is why we should never support the Conservative Party, we are still seeing a breaking down of just like what happened with homosexuals in this country, where at first they were demonized and belittled, and then what really started to happen, I actually experienced this in my small town of Portage la Prairie, right? You guys got to remember, I am initially from the small town of Portage la Prairie, Manitoba. Here's my small town, right? Not only this, I didn't even live in town. I lived about here, around this area. Can we even find the community? Edwin. So here's Edwin, Manitoba. Is it even going to show up houses or anything? No. As far as anyone's concerned, Edwin, Manitoba is literally just a Canada Post out in the middle of nowhere, right? And I lived probably about here. I'm not seeing any landmark to really help me here, but yeah, probably about here. So I would have to drive every day into Portage la Prairie in order to go to school, right? And that was my life. And in Portage la Prairie, when the homosexual rights movement began, there was a very concerted effort, because Portage la Prairie is very church-based. There was a pushback against this, but what happened is that a few members of the community admitted that they were gay. That in the thrust of all of this and the swell of the culture, a couple of members of the community came out and said that they were gay, including a fellow who had been married and had had several children and was in his mid-50s. He came out as gay. And when that happened, right, it was the women in the community who looked at him and said, but we know Tim. Like, we know who this person is. We've known him our whole lives. He's not evil. Like, he can't possibly, is like this homosexuality that he's coming out with. Like, there's no reason for him to say this. He's not gaining anything. It's not fashionable or in vogue for him to admit this and to put this hardship on our families. So it's got to be that what the homosexual community is telling us, how it's natural and it's part of the creation of all of this, is true. And once the women in the community started talking that way, the men at least shut up about it. Like they go to their clubhouses and they say what they want to say at the clubhouse. I'm sure of it, but they at least stopped talking about it in public. And a similar thing is happening with this issue. That there are lots of people who were like, and as early as this year, Aaron O'Toole at the beginning of this year said that the residential school systems started as an attempt to do good, right? That ministers stood up as early as last month and said, but we have to think of the good that the residential school system did, right? As early as last month, they were saying this shit. And it's just like, and incidentally, the minister that said that, the pastor rather that said that, is no longer the pastor of that community, right? Because it's become too obvious. It's right in front of our face. And so there is a positive move on this issue that I am seeing, and it's even happening in the party that still allows fascists in their ranks. Ugh. 5,000 years, you're right, new perspective, my mistake. Canada accused China for Xinjiang because they did the thing to its own people. Yeah, I do think there is a bit of that, bud. I do think there is a bit of, like, deflection happening there. That they at least have to put China on equal footing, right? Otherwise, how can they elaborate so vividly? Oh, yeah. Like, it is kind of irreverent to say these things, but there's truth in this, right? There's truth in this. Like, we know for a fact that the West is enacting not only like what's going on at the United States-Mexico border with ICE and the DEA, these ICE detention centers. Like, we've seen the photographs. It all looks very, very nasty. But like, we know about what's going on in the Gaza Strip. We know what's happening in Yemen. We know what's happening in Guantanamo Bay. Like, we know what's happening in Guantanamo Bay, right? Like, we know. And so the Americans are doing everything they can to be like, okay, so we've got Guantanamo, we've got the Yemeni genocide, we've got to accuse China of something at least on that same scale. And so they're turning around and saying, like, oh, what's happening in Xinjiang? Yeah. I think you're probably right, dude. It's well, and we're not particularly impressive. Like, what's the big story that creates tensions between Canada and China? Is the United States had us detain, I forget her name, because China detained two diplomats who we don't know what the story is there, because but you don't just arrest two diplomats because you feel like you want to arrest them. They were probably doing something illegal, right? They were probably, spying and being spies. And so the United States has Canada pick up one of their people, right? And it's like, come on. Like, yeah. And it's such a shame, because I just think that Canada and the United States and China, why are we doing this war? What is this war for? Right? Like, what is it for? It's for securing a resource that in 50 years is no longer going to be used, because we'll have burned it all, right? That we literally turned this place into rubble and set these people back hundreds and hundreds of years, and we we've reduced all of it and destroyed everything and created genocides and created hardships and destroyed entire generations of people for what? For what? Literally, for what? When if I ever get to 80 or 90, right? In 40, 50 years, the relationship of what's going on here with the United States and this region is going to be completely different, because the United States is not going to they're not going to get anything for being here. Not that they're really getting anything for being here right now. And we don't need to act this way. This is the thing that's so weird about this. It doesn't need to be this way. It doesn't need to be this way. No shit, eh? Did this just happen, damn boxes? Hate to be the bearer of bad news again, but more explosions in Gaza. Sure, reports will be coming out this evening or tomorrow morning. Several huge explosions shake Gaza right now. Israel warplanes and drones are hovering at low altitudes now. And this is breaking, right? I wonder if any of I won't get on my own Twitter feed on the stream, but it's one sort of hoped that the transfer of power from Netanyahu to this new fellow whose name eludes me all of a sudden would at least create a oh, hey, here you go. There you go, bud. Several huge explosions shake Gaza right now. Oh my God. Why? And for what? For what? What are we gaining? What are we gaining from this? What are we gaining? What do we earn? What is this doing? What is this? Can someone please answer me? What is this doing? What is this achieving? All it is going to end up doing is continuing to isolate Israel and continuing to isolate the United States, right? That more and more and more people, and especially Biden's recent bombing of Syria, right? Showing muscle, right now, the United States is in a very tenuous position with its allies in Europe, right? Oh, I know, buddy. Hello. My dog wants me to pay attention to him for a second here, so okay. Let's. Oh, yes. I know, buddy. You hate it when I do that. I know. I love you too. I love you too. Angry pug. It's in a very tenuous relationship with Europe at the moment that the Trump administration scared the shit out of Europe, right? Like, Germany was outright saying, this guy looks like Hitler, right? And like, if you're from Poland, Austria, Italy, France, the United Kingdom, you're taking that shit seriously. You're not just shrugging and being like, oh, that's an overreaction. No, you're saying of the largest military with the largest nuclear armament, when the Chancellor of Germany stands up and says, this guy looks like fucking Hitler, yeah, you're going to listen. And that makes you uneasy, right? When the Biden administration, and Biden said this, he outright admitted this, that when he said to the European powers, America's back, their response was, for how long, right? So they're very skittish of these Americans. And when the Americans keep funneling money into Israel so that they can continue a genocide that is obviously a genocide in front of their faces, right, makes them a bit skittish. And when the UN stands up and has like a council vote on whether or not we should declare this a genocide, and literally the whole world says it's a genocide except the United States and Israel, that makes them skittish. And once you start to understand more and more about... Oh, I shouldn't have done that. I know, buddy, I know. Once you start to understand more and more about the Belt and Road Initiative, right? About building these high-speed railways through Russia, through the Middle East, in order to get into Europe, in order to subvert United States disruption in the East China Sea and the South China Sea, as well as all over the place. Like they're trying to get over the fact that the Suez Canal is so easy to control by the Americans, right? That the Americans could just like shut down the Suez Canal to Chinese Chinese mobility, right? Which would create a huge problem. They'd have to go all the way around the Horn of Africa here. And so they would much rather have something like the Belt and Road Initiative, right, in place. And this is definitely putting Europe in something of a conundrum, right? Because on the one hand, they see the United States for what it is, which is a massive military force that is a psychopath, right? And you don't want to piss that guy off. Like, you don't want to piss that guy off. If there's a guy in the room with a gun who's just shooting people and there's nobody you can turn to, you want to be that guy's friend, right? It's just a survival tactic. But at the same time, they're having major trade inroads with China. And so the EU and each independent nation is really starting to contemplate. And where this is being discussed most openly is in Australia. Australia is having enormous, large-scale conversations through their university systems where they are really asking themselves the deep, important questions about where are we going to end up here? How are we going to end up? Like, Australia's economy is enormously tied to China at the moment. And of course, the American argument is, well, we're not going to let you side with China. Like, you're going to side with us because we're the big boy on the stage, right? That's their argument. That's what their guy literally says. That they send, the Americans send a dude to these Australian places, and his argument fundamentally is the United States is a crazy psychopath on the world stage that doesn't want a peer competitor and isn't going to tolerate Australia continuing to trade with China if the United States doesn't want it to, right? That's his argument. And he's saying this like at the highest level of institutions. And meanwhile, Australia is sort of crossing its fingers. Okay, buddy, down you go, down you go, down you go. Australia is sort of crossing its fingers and hoping that they can maintain trade alliances with both. That they can just act as something of a mediator, or that they can act as that they can be kind of independent in some kind of military struggle or conflict that occurs between these two. And of course, the Americans are saying, no, you're not going to be independent. Like, that's not going to happen. And so if you're Europe, this is all very scary. This is all very scary. And so to link it all back to the bombing and the ongoing genocide that's going on in Israel, this only serves to continue to isolate America further. That as China tightens its trade relations with Europe through the Belt and Road Initiative, right, it's going to become more and more appealing for the Europeans to begin to lean more heavily on China as an ally instead of this fucking monster that's just committing genocides and acting like a total psychopath. Like, and in the end, it's very difficult for me to believe that any of this is going to end up benefiting the United States, right? That the United States one day, and it's going to happen sooner than you think, is going to wake up and realize that it doesn't have any allies anymore. That the only allies it has are these allies of convenience who are just like, yeah, haha, United States, please don't bomb me, right? Which is essentially Canada's position, right? Canada's position, without a doubt, is, haha, yeah, US, whatever you say, don't bomb me. Links don't come through, New Perspective. I don't really understand. I don't really understand why, but no, links don't come through. So if you want me to search something, I can search it up. Yet the fundamental of monotheistic is we are the best. We are right, you are wrong. There's no coexistence, no harmony. Well, and the monotheistic tradition has a really like duality, right? That it doesn't, it separates the spirit. It separates the existential sort of self from the material world in a way that I don't think is healthy. I don't think it's healthy to think of yourself as like separate from another kind of reality, when in truth, these things are linked and merged to one another, that they're intrinsic. Negri Botos Services, good to see you. Oh, come on, bud. Are you coming in here and throwing an ad? Feelings of despair. Worry not, as those are normal reactions after losing loved ones. We at Negrobos. Yeah, okay, bud. More than happy to put you in timeout. American conservatives are crediting President Trump for being the first president to not start a war since Reagan, while he simultaneously threatened war against Syria over Twitter and nearly started a civil war. Yeah, but I mean, it's true. It's true that it's a step up. Like, this is how pathetic the American empire has become. This is how pathetic they've become. That the truth is that the Trump administration, in terms of the amount of warfare that they actually engaged in, was a step up from the Obama administration, from the Bush administration, from the Clinton administration, right? It was a step up. That what Trump's like major military thing was, he assassinated an Iranian general. That was like the one big thing that he did. That Trump assassinated an Iranian general. It's like, oh, okay. Like, meanwhile, the Obama administration was responsible for the full-scale destruction of Libya, right? The Bush administration, right? We all know about the Iraq War. I know, buddy. The Iraq War, right? And and so, like, there are actually things that Trump did that completely flew into the face of the traditional sort of military situation. For example, the situation between North and South Korea, right? North and South Korea are attempting to reunify. That everybody at every level is interested in reunification between North and South Korea. And they collectively released a document stating their intention. This happened during the Trump administration. Stating their intention to reunify and their interest in reunification. And within that document, they said, we would like to do this without interference, which is explicitly, which is a statement, United States, stay out of it, please. Just stay the fuck out of this, okay? And the Trump administration's response to that was, okay. And they just stayed out of it. They didn't fuck around. They were just like, oh, okay. You guys are trying to work it out, you work it out, that's fine. You can really hear Donald Trump saying it, like, what, North and South Korea, they want to work something out. They want to make a deal with one another. They want to figure it out. You know what? Let's let them just figure it out. You know, there's no reason to get involved in that. That's their arrangement. They need to work it out. You know, God bless America. And so, like, but the thing is that Trump was such a grotesque, and because of his dementia, right? A big problem with Trump was that he felt that he could say whatever he wanted. And because he has dementia, sometimes he would say things that were just like taking the mask of the empire right off. He would literally be like, yeah, we went over there for the oil. Yeah, we went over there for the oil. I don't know why we're going over there for the oil. We should go down to Venezuela and get the oil there. Right? Like, he was saying this shit. Like, Obama would never say that. Right? Clinton would never say that. Even George W. Bush wouldn't say that. Right? George W. Bush is like, yeah, we're gonna go over to Iraq to free them, spread democracy. Like, that's how fucking stupid Americans are. Yeah, we're going to Iraq to destroy it in the name of democracy and spreading democracy, right? Meanwhile, they're like, oh, maybe it has something to do with the gigantic oil fields? Nah. And then out comes Trump, like 20 years later. Yeah, we're in there for oil. It's the oil, that's why we're there. So they can't have a president doing that shit. They can't have a president telling the truth like that, right? That's the reason why Trump needed to go. That's the number one reason Trump needed to go, is because he was telling the truth. He was telling the truth about the American empire because of his dementia and because he's too stupid to realize that telling the truth is exactly not the thing he should be doing. And he's just like so detached. But he's always been like that, right? Like, way back, like back in the 80s, he outright said, like, yeah, if I were to ever run for president, I think I would run in the Republican Party because they're so stupid they'll vote for anybody. Right? He said this, and then it happened. Like, fuck. Like, fuck. Would you ever vote for somebody if they stood up? Let's say you're like an NDP voter, and somebody stood up and said, like, yeah, I'll run for the NDP because those guys are gullible idiots that'll vote for anybody. You'd never vote for that guy. You'd never vote for that guy. That's why I don't think I'll ever actually run for office, because I continuously say that Westerners are incredibly gullible and stupid. Because we are. Because we are. It's so obvious that we are. Like, for fuck's sake, the Americans voted for Donald Trump. Like, yeah, you're fucking gullible. You're voting for Donald Trump, and he's going to go in there, he's going to drain that swamp. You watch him. He's going to go in there, he was on the Jeffrey Epstein flights because he was undercover. He's spying on him, gathering information, and then he's going to drain the swamp, and the FBI is going to come in with the CIA, and they're going to take down all the bad guys, and then he's going to make America great again. Ha, ha, ha. Right? Like, fuck. New paper demonstrates empirically that when it comes to meeting human needs, what matters is not aggregate economic growth beyond moderate levels, but rather provisioning systems. To say this more clearly, systems that give food and shelter to people are better than giving money to rich cocksuckers who are just going to offshore their wealth, right? Big fucking surprise. Let me actually take a look at this one. Socioeconomic conditions for satisfying human needs at low energy use. An international analysis of social provisioning. Alright, this is like a big long, you can see there's graphs and stuff. I'm for sure going to pay attention to this later. Probably bookmark this. Get out of here. Bookmark. Add bookmark. I've become like an economics nerd, right? Like I don't have like a degree. I've never gone to like an institution, and I actually think that that's helped me a lot because I didn't get like brainwashed by bullshit neoliberalism that I had to then like purge, right? I was able to actually get into the field because I like, and it was for very simple reasons. It was like these economists kept saying insane things that were obviously insane. And then when I would push back against them, they would be like, oh, ho, 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 you just don't understand what I'm saying. You just don't understand. And so I'm like, oh, okay, so I'll read your literature, right? And so you read Adam Smith, right? You read what these guys are saying, and you realize very quickly when you actually start reading their literature that these guys are fucking illiterate, that they have not read their own literature, right? And then you start getting into Karl Marx, you start getting into his shit, and you realize very quickly that these guys have not read a single fucking thing. And then along comes a guy like Thomas Piketty, who writes Capital in the 21st Century, and you realize very quickly when you're reading this guy, you're like, oh, here's a guy who's actually read the literature, who actually understands what economics is and how it works. And I'm not talking about low-level people, guys. I'm talking about like Harvard economics professors that are illiterate. They don't know anything about the field. I'm talking about people like Paul Krugman, right? Like, they're fucking illiterate. They don't know anything about the field. And how do I know? Because when you actually read the literature, you realize this has nothing to do with what you're saying. That Adam Smith and I'm blanking on it, like Ricard, all these guys, like, that it has absolutely, like, neoliberal economics isn't economics. This is like the final thing that I've come down to, is that, like, neoliberal trickle-down economics isn't economics. It's an ideology couched to look like an economic system, but it isn't economics, because it has nothing to do with fucking economics. Marxian economist Richard Wolff talks about his Ivy League education, upbringing with such disdain, neoliberal brain rot. He luckily made it out on the right side. Well, and also I think that has to do with his own upbringing, right? Like, he grew up with, like, kind of with Marx and this kind of stuff around him at the very least. But yeah, he points out very cleanly, like, he got a PhD in economics and never had to read Marx. Like, that means you're illiterate, right? Like, that means that you don't know what you're talking about. If you're not reading and attempting to respond to, at the very least, if you're not reading and attempting to respond to the largest critique against capitalism that was ever written, that means that you're illiterate. I have a university degree. You had to read the critiques of the stuff that you were reading. Always. And the idea, and like, you have to do that in physics. You have to do that in math. You have to do that in chemistry, right? You have, every field I've ever encountered in my life, if you wanted to be a professional in that field, you had to know what your enemies were saying, or at least the people who disagreed with you, and you had to be able to formulate a response to it. Not in economics. And it's 100% because a group of religious ideologues called neoliberals took over and got well funded by business interests to take over, and spewed this venomous ideology into the halls of the universities and convinced everybody with slick talk. Like, Milton Friedman was a con man, right? Like, his economic ideas, the economics of neoliberalism, have failed completely to the ground. Literally, they're saying of Milton Friedman in Chile that he's a failure, right? That neoliberalism was born in Chile, it dies in Chile. That's what they're saying in Chile. And, like, the grift that's been perpetrated throughout the economics departments becomes incredibly obvious the minute you read their literature, the minute you pick up their books and crack them open and look at them. You go, neoliberalism is a false ideology. Obviously. As stated by economists like Adam Smith. If all you ever read was Adam Smith's work, you would walk away from that saying neoliberalism is a false ideology. From the works of Adam Smith, you would be saying that. When he talks about the invisible hand of the market, he talks about it derisively. The only time Adam Smith talks about the invisible hand of the market is to deride it, to say that it will spread misery, right? and people stand up and use this invisible hand of the market as if something we're supposed to venerate, because that's what they're worshiping. They're worshiping money. The invisible hand of the market will decide. Yeah, the invisible hand of the market will decide, and sometimes it'll decide to crush us. Ruth, I'm actually waiting for a civil war. The poor and uneducated will bring their guns and knives and bear spray, and the rich will be hiding like they do now and then brag about it. I mean, the civil war is ongoing, right? Like, what happened after the George Floyd execution was like an act of war, for sure. The amount of destruction that occurred after that, the protests and the riots that occurred after that, were highly destructive. Like, in the billions of dollars of property destruction. It's the reason why the sociopathic billionaire class turned it into a big talking point, right? They were like, "Oh, these protesters and rioters, they're so evil for destroying our property," and they're just revealing themselves as sycophants, right? And psychopaths, because they obviously care more about their property than they do about human lives, like, obviously. And they're obviously going to create more force and put more effort into protecting their property than they will ever to protect people like George Floyd, right? And so that's part of the Civil War. The Civil War is ongoing. It's already happening, right? It's just that it's not full scale yet. It hasn't ramped up quite yet, but it's for sure right in front of us. It's already happening, and like. And as climate change starts to have its say, like, all it's going to take is one big hurricane to completely wipe out Florida. Florida is absolutely going to be wiped out because they still believe George Floyd is property. Yeah, there's something to that, Ruth. We are definitely still casting off those like the curse of slavery, which is still around. Like, the prison system is a slave system. That's for sure what it is. Like, anybody who wants to tell me that the prison system is not a slave system, I think has a nail in their brain. Like, no. You have the highest prison population on the planet by a large margin, and of the people who are in prison, the vast majority of them are black. That's a slave system. That's an extension of slavery. For sure. And like, climate change is gonna, a big old hurricane's gonna come through. Places like Miami, Orlando are gonna be gone. New York's gonna eat the big one, man. How anybody thinks like being in New York is a good idea at this point. The whole eastern seaboard is just gonna get totally fucked. And when this happens, you're gonna have a huge influx of refugees heading inland, right? And guess what? They're all fucking armed. Like, it's a disaster. It's already a disaster. And the response from the Biden administration, oh, we'll infrastructure program which will just give a bunch of money to the rich people. That'll fix it. Yep. We'll give money to the rich people. That'll fix it. Come on, man. Come on, Jack. We're trying to America, making things great here in America by giving money to rich people. And if you think otherwise, that's a bunch of malarkey, Jack. Come on, man. Another old, senile, demented old white man, right? Yeah, after Sandy, I'd be moving if I were in New York. Yeah, because that's just the beginning of it, right? Like, you're in New York, and what happened? And they have completely abandoned. They've completely abandoned. Where the heck is that? Sandy Hook. They have completely abandoned this area. Like, they never came back. They never rebuilt it. They never did any of that. They literally abandoned it. Like, you can go watch documentaries. People went into the region and were like, hey, any plans to rebuild? And the people who are still there, because they got nowhere else to go, are just like, no. Indiana has never been touched by a hurricane. That won't be true for long. Yeah. Like, and you're like, you're talking about like, I know I've got a regular who comes in here onward to dystopia. He lives near Atlanta, and I keep telling him, like, get ready for it, man. You're gonna get a big influx big influx of people are going to be coming up into Georgia, man. Georgia's going to become like not to mention the people who are coming from Charleston and Savannah, right? Like you're going to be seeing and I hate to say it of poor Cuba, but the Cubans are going to eat it, man. They're going to eat it in big ways. It would be lovely if they didn't. It'd be lovely if it was mainly this kind of United States section and they kind of got left alone, but I fear that that's not going to be the case. Nova Scotia and PEI. I actually wrote a song. All right, I'll play this song. Let's see if I can remember how to play it. So, as water levels are rising, so this is a classic country tune that I wrote when I heard that that PEI is experiencing land destruction, right, around its borders, to the degree that it is only a matter of time before Prince Edward Island is gone. If you're not familiar with Prince Edward Island, the only way in is from this right here. Okay. Let's see if I can remember all the lyrics. It's been a long time since I played this song. Well, me and mine the other day got loaded in the van, heading down to PEI to see them singing sands. We rocked and rolled down to the coast and then we stopped and stared. The whole damn province of PEI, it simply wasn't there. Well, can anybody tell me where Prince Edward Island's gone? It was just over the bridge, but maybe I was wrong. There's just a big old ocean where the province did belong. Can anybody tell me where Prince Edward Island's gone? I wrote a letter to my ma and wrote one to my pa. I had to tell him quickly what it was my two I saw. I wrote them about how the whole island could sink. They wrote me back and told me, son, you gotta lay off the drink. Well, can anybody tell me where Prince Edward Island's gone? It was just over the bridge, but maybe I was wrong. There's just a big old ocean where the province did belong. Can anybody tell me where Prince Edward Island's gone? I went down to the paper to find out if they knew how it was the island disappeared into the blue. They told me there's no story, it's a snoozer and a bore. They'll publish up a fluff piece on page 204. Well, can anybody tell me where Prince Edward Island's gone? It was just over the bridge, but maybe I was wrong. There's just a big old ocean where the province did belong. Can anybody tell me where Prince Edward Island's gone? I spoke to a politician to find out if he knew how it was the island disappeared into the blue. He signed a check to the oil man, then cried out with a sob, I can't do nothing for PEI, cause that would mean less jobs. Well, can anybody tell me where Prince Edward Island's gone? It was just over the bridge, but maybe I was wrong. There's just a big old ocean where the province did belong. Can anybody tell me where Prince Edward Island's gone? I went home sad and confused about Prince Edward's fate. How was it? I thought that we'd do something before it was too late. Why call ourselves a country if we don't have each other's back? Well, I gotta go and pack The water's reaching my front stoop, I gotta go out and pack. Can anybody tell me where Prince Edward Island's gone? 'Cause just over the bridge, but maybe I was wrong. There's just a big old ocean where the province did belong. Can anybody tell me where Prince Edward Island's gone? Oh. System scan complete. Thanks, Total AV. What would I do without you? I feel like that should become like the national anthem of Prince Edward Island. Or like the provincial anthem. So there you go, guys. That's my world debut of Can Anybody Tell Me Where Prince Edward Island's Gone? With a slightly out-of-tune guitar and a completely unpracticed voice. I definitely screwed up like 15 times. Ugh. Yeah, it's extremely likely. Like, Prince Edward Island is experiencing like... yeah, well, I mean, I spent a year on the East Coast. And you pick it up. You pick it up pretty quickly when you're out there. Everything's kind of that way. Well, and thank you for the compliment, Matt. I appreciate it. If that tune tickled your fancy, please be sure to donate to my Patreon so that I can continue writing excellent songs like Prince Edward Island. Can anybody tell me where Prince Edward Island's gone? Maybe the next time I'll play it, I'll tune my guitar first. What do you think? What do you think? Yeah, I lived in Moncton for a year and did some beekeeping. Very I would love to get back to beekeeping, man. I would love to get back to beekeeping. I just haven't been able to find a way to do it here in Toronto. And anyway. We'll see where life takes me on that front. All right. Well, with that said, I'm going to pause for a minute, go use the bathroom. So we're going to just have a quick 30-second chair stream. Chair stream, chair stream. Let's enjoy the chair stream. Yeah, that's probably my most upbeat song that I play. Most of my songs I would classify as blues. I think I spend most of my time in the blues. Which makes sense considering that I suffer from pretty major depression. Yeah, Biden bombs Iraq. Is he bombing Iraq now? Oh, good. Yeah, good. Because that's been effective, right? It's been super effective to bomb these places. Oh, look at this. Look at this. Oh, wow. Queen Victoria statue at Manitoba legislature toppled. Wow. Wow. So for those of you who don't know, Manitoba has actually had a very strong and powerful truth and reconciliation movement that has been very largely supported by all aspects of the society, outside of the fascists, obviously, but that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission really mattered in Manitoba, and they built a human rights museum in Winnipeg. so there's been like a lot of effort that has been, and of course it's not perfect, obviously, and they're still moving and still working to try to improve things further and further, but there is more acceptance of the truth of what's happening, and so I'm not surprised to see this kind of thing happening in Manitoba. And you got to remember, like, Manitoba is where Louis Riel comes from, and Manitobans are very proud of Louis Riel. Louis Riel was a Métis who was responsible for the formation of Manitoba. That the Ontarians, their goal, and I believe it was John A. Macdonald, right? He was pushing the railway through Manitoba in order to expand the borders of Canada, and simply absorb more territory into Ontario and into a larger way of doing things. And of course, the Métis in the region, and the First Nations people in the region, and even the white settlers, right, held the opinion, because they knew what was going to happen, that there was just going to be a gobbling up of this territory, and they would lose their ability to rule themselves. They wouldn't be able to elect their own leadership, that sort of thing. They knew that was what was happening, because that's what was happening. And so Louis Riel led the resistance against John A. Macdonald and the Canadian forces. And they had an open firefight about it, which is so it was very much an act of rebellion, and it created a little parcel, which was like this territory here was Manitoba for like the littlest time, and then eventually it became all of this. And Louis Riel, because of his leadership in the open rebellion, became a wanted man in Ottawa, right? Became a wanted man in Ottawa. They wanted to try him for treason, for crimes, right? But the problem was that Louis Riel was the fellow who kept getting elected. The people of Manitoba elected Louis Riel to the seat that Louis Riel fought to create, right? But he could never actually go and occupy that seat, because he knew that if he were, hey Dan, how you doing? If he were to go and actually occupy that seat, they would hang him. And eventually, after years of living in isolation and exile, which was driving him mad, frankly, he decided that this was no way to live his life, and so he went to Ottawa to occupy his seat, and they hung him. So, and if it wasn't for Louis Riel, Manitoba wouldn't exist. So, and then we turn around and we celebrate Louis Riel Day, and what's Stephen Harper go and do? He declares a holiday on the same day as Louis Riel Day, and he calls it Family Day. Everybody, let's celebrate Family Day. Forget about this like seminal Manitoban figure that everybody in Manitoba admires and pays attention to for his rebellious spirit. And so it's no surprise at all that we get events like this. This is the spirit of Louis Riel right here, making this happen. Post-second dose tiredness? Yep.